All right, the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is live here on October 16th, 2024. Good evening, everyone. I am Kris Baker here with the Athletics' Matthew Fairburn following the Sabres 6-5 overtime loss tonight in Pittsburgh. JJ Peterka had a nice return tonight with a pair of goals. Tage Thompson, Jordan Greenway, and Ryan McLeod were your other scorers for the Sabres. UPL stops 36 of 42 shots in defeat. So the Sabres fall to 1-3-1 on the year through their first 5-game block. And they have just 3 points collected here in the standings. Matthew Fairburn, how would you capsulize what you saw from the Buffalo Sabres tonight? I don't even know where to start. First of all, I'll just say this. It was kind of a disappointing outcome for Sabres fans, obviously. But that game was actually fun in terms of if you're a general fan of the sport. Up and down, you had a team with a hot start. Sabres score 2 goals on the first 2 shots. Things are looking good. They're 1-2, right? What is it? Well, no, when they score first, right? So we've talked about a team that was a chronic slow starter last year. Now they've actually scored first in some games, and they only come away with 1 win. So I don't even know where to begin, but it was an exciting game. Bad result for Sabres fans, obviously. I'm going to throw it over to you. How are you feeling about this team here after the game tonight and after the first 5?
Yeah, this was a major missed opportunity to me. I think they got call them 2 gifts to start the game. I mean, Tristan Jarry was not playing well. The first goal was an absolute gift. Good play by Tage Thompson, but a complete mishap by Jarry and handling the puck in the Penguins' defense. Erik Karlsson on the next goal basically gave the puck away to Jordan Greenway. It was just way too casual. And, the Sabres capitalized. They got the 2-0, lead. And then it was just poor game management for a little while. And, they stay up 3-1 because of JJ Peterka scoring, to answer that first Penguins goal. But then you let the Penguins get 3 straight, find your way back into it, and then can't close it out at the end of regulation to get the 2 points. So you go into overtime against that team, take a penalty, and, Sidney Crosby makes him pay. It was a lot. Like you said, it was an entertaining hockey game for the neutral observer, but a lot of frustration on my timeline and in my mentions because this is the type of game that I think this team, guys in the locker room, but also fans have recognized that these add up over the course of the season. The little points missed to other teams in the conference do add up. And in the context of what is now a 1-3-1 start, you had the missed opportunity last week against the Kings where they really outplayed them, but couldn't finish their scoring chances. And two pretty lousy games in Prague, I would say. So it's been an uneven start to the season. They're not playing bad. They're really not, but there's some issues that might be enough to doom them. I know it's only 5 games, but if some of these issues persist that we'll get to, probably starting with special teams, mostly the power play. Maybe that is where we start. We were talking before, like, where do you start with a game like this? There's like 4 or 5 different things you could get into. And we're also kind of trying to put the first 5 games into a neat little box here. But the power play is a bit of a problem because they are now 0 for 15 with the man advantage this season. Their one opportunity in this game, they squandered it by, one, taking a penalty, and then the Penguins took another penalty to put the Sabres back on the man advantage, 4-on-3. Dylan Cousins turns the puck over, and they get a shorthanded goal the other way. That was what started to turn things a little bit for the Penguins. You can't let a team like that hang around. You had a chance to finish them off with a power play. We talked coming into this game. We were talking this morning, just mapping out the show. The Penguins were allowing like the fourth most shots per 60 on the penalty kill. They were allowing about 3 opportunities a game, in terms of taking penalties. This should have been a night where the power play could have got on track. The power play could have won the game for you there, could have, you know, extended that lead, and instead it went the other way, actively hurt you. So special teams, they absolutely need to figure out, because the Penguins scored when they pulled the goalie. Penguins scored shorthanded. Penguins scored with the power play in overtime. And did they have another power play goal in this game?
Shorthanded, 1 power play in regulation, 1 power play in OT.
So you had 2 power play goals. You had the extra attacker goal, and you had a shorthanded goal. It was all special teams, really, for the Penguins in this one. And when they gifted them, they spotted the Sabres too to start. It's just an ugly way to lose a game in a lot of ways.
0 for 15 on the power play to start the year. I mean, I think until they score one, we're going to keep talking about it. I think that's going to be the proper place to start until they score, because that's, winning hockey is scoring on the power play. I know we want to see the team play well at 5-on-5, and on many of these games they have, take some of the Prague games out of the way, or out of the equation, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, 1 win, and I'm looking at the first 5 games now, kind of zooming out just from this game for a second. I mean, the Sabres were 2-3 to start the year last year. They had 4 points through 5 games. And we could talk about underlying metrics. They're playing better. The only thing that really matters is wins and losses and points in the standings, right? So, I mean, I don't want to, I tend to not overreact, and maybe that's a fault sometimes, because sometimes you have to kind of assess a team. But I mean, I don't know. Are they in crisis mode already, though? Seriously, because we talked about some of the things that Kevyn Adams didn't do coming into the season. Not getting a top 6 forward. Yeah, Jason Zucker put on the power play tonight. Welcome to the first unit power play. Takes penalty, nullifies it right away. Hasn't been awful, but hasn't been a $5 million player.
No,
right?
Not even close.
So,
Not even close.
I mean, I don't want to, just kind of pull the ripcord here and start panicking, because that's just not in my nature. But I don't like what I'm seeing. I thought that we would see, it's not just a power play, though. I mean, Dylan Cousins leading the team in shots on goal coming into tonight. That line just didn't generate a lot of attacking time, a lot of offense. I think that I didn't look at Twitter. You mentioned your kind of replies and kind of what you're feeling. I suspect it's largely because of the turnover, which was a crucial point in the game. The psychodynamics of the sport tell you, like, when you're not scoring on the power play and then you give up a shorthanded goal, that just deflates you, man. I'm assuming, though, he's getting beat up for that. But I think, he's the center of that line that didn't really generate a lot of offense tonight. Is that kind of what you're feeling from fans? And do you agree with them on Cousins?
Coming into this game, I wasn't particularly worried about Cousins. And it feels like a lot of I don't like to take a few opinions on Twitter and extrapolate it into a consensus. But, there's some concern out there about Dylan Cousins. Maybe the chat feels differently. I don't know. I thought he was playing fairly well coming into this game by a lot of measures. Like you said, shots on goal, very physically engaged. I think he was second on the team in hits coming into the game. A lot of chances, was around it a lot. That line with Kulik on the wing and Quinn on the other wing actually played pretty well against Florida. So I don't think it's been all bad for Dylan Cousins, but still he's sitting here without a point through 5 games, and he's a $7 million player. So I understand the frustration. I do wonder, I spoke to him the other day, and he seems, as of the other day, in a pretty good headspace. But as this continues to go on, we know this is a guy that is pretty hard on himself. I mean, he smashed his stick coming off the ice after that Kings game. He badly wants this team to win and he wants to be part of it. But you had the turnover there on the power play. And to me, Jack Quinn is actually the more concerning piece of that line.
Yeah, I
You
think
know,
so
that
too.
they were, because I've seen some positives from Dylan Cousins that, like I mentioned, even just him being more physically engaged is helping him, in all three zones. Didn't see as much of that from him last year, which was a bit alarming. But Jack Quinn has been somewhat invisible, almost in each of the 5 games, had a little bit going in that Panthers game. But this was the guy that was supposed to break out, right? This is the guy that is, if he takes that step forward, you all of a sudden aren't that concerned about the scoring. But if he doesn't, and if Dylan Cousins can't find his way back, you're already seeing the effect of, like you mentioned, not having reinforced the top 6 with another proven scorer. And Zucker is not it. He's been a solid third line player. I think the third line has been good, but he's not going to solve your problems in the top 6. If Quinn can't get going, if that line can't get going, that will be a major problem. That is your second line, right? Like, these are not young players that you're sprinkling in at different spots. They are a unit on the second line. Like Cousins and Quinn, you want those guys to account for at least 40 goals, right? I would think
Oh,
between the
at
two of them.
least. Yeah,
Between the
oh,
two of them,
minimum. Yeah.
ideally
Oh, yeah.
you'd like 50 plus out of those guys.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're confident that you're getting 50 plus based on what we've seen. So I'm a little bit in between, I guess, on Cousins, where I think, maybe some of the criticism comes from the lack of counting stats and that there are some encouraging signs in his game. I just have not been thrilled with Quinn and what they're getting there. And it creates also a whole ripple effect of problems when we talk about the power play. Like, these are guys that are supposed to be driving the power play. And when you don't have them, you have Zucker on the top unit. You have 2 defensemen on your top unit, which we talked about earlier today too. Like, one of 3 teams with 2 defensemen
Yeah, Pittsburgh's one of them with
on their
Carlson and
top unit.
Letang, and then Florida's been using 2 just because they're missing Kachuk and Barkov.
And I guess the Sabres would fall into that Penguins category, right? Where you have 2 number 1 overall picks in Dahlin and Power, but
There's merit to them there, but that's not ideal.
that's
Yeah.
not how you drew it up at the beginning of the season. And I think this power play, the power play is simple. Like, sometimes you can boil things down to some simple issues, right? And last year, the drop off in the power play is a big reason why they dropped off in goals and a big reason why they weren't close to the playoffs. And they did not do, I would say they did not do anything meaningful to address it. Would that be fair? Would you agree with that? I would say that the changes they made, they fired Don Granato and replaced him with Lindy Ruff. They moved Matt Ellis upstairs to be the eye in the
Who
sky.
was running the power play, right?
He was running the power play. And they promoted Seth Appert to run the power play. He was the head coach in Rochester. They were not a world beater on the power play in the AHL last season, despite having a fair amount of talent. So that's a very small adjustment. You bring up, I would consider that a bit of a minor adjustment. I guess you have Lindy Ruff, so he's an experienced eye looking at things. But the one tabbed with running it is a guy who had never run it at the NHL level. Very promising coach, Appert is, and worthy of the promotion, but worthy of the promotion to put in that spot and to handle that responsibility, I think time will tell. They didn't bring in any other assistants, right? They kept the rest of the coaching staff the same, which I think is something to keep in mind as context throughout this season. From a personnel standpoint, in terms of players, Zucker is the only real new piece, unless you count Byram, to that second unit. But Zucker is maybe a 20-goal guy in the best case scenario, and that was a few years ago now. Like, I don't know if he's got 20 in him this year. He's a good two-way guy. He's a nice veteran to have in the room. I think don't have too much to complain about with him as a player, but he's not your answer on the power play. And so you're sitting here 5 games in, 15 tries in, and you don't have a goal. And right now, it's probably the difference between them being 3-2, 3-1-1, or at least 2-2-1, or something like that, right?
100%. It's the difference. Like, when you have 15 tries, and if you score on 25% of them, that's a pretty good number in your goal differential column. And yes,
probably beat the Kings, right? You probably get at least one more win. You might beat New Jersey one of those games if you can score on the power play. That changes games. You win this game if you score on that power play. It's a 2-goal swing. So you can't have it. You just can't have that problem persist year over year, and it can't just be a game reps or inexperienced thing. Like, this power play was legitimately good 2 years ago with a lot of the same players, and they've completely lost it.
That's why I'm wondering what's up here, and that's why I asked the question about crisis mode. And I know it's like, alarmist, and I'm not trying to go there, but the power play has seemingly gone backwards after a bad year last season. And I think a lot of folks like myself were thinking, okay, they possibly can't do this 2 years in a row. You're going to get bounce back years. We're not seeing it just yet. I know it's early, but the Quinn thing is concerning. He had one shot on goal tonight, point blank opportunity. It was early when Yoel Blomqvist came in, made a good save. I'm not going to sit here and say the Sabres got goal lead tonight. Kind of hate that term anyways, but they didn't. They did it to themselves. But yeah,
He did
Quinn is
play well.
concerning.
I thought that was
He played great, but they didn't get
thought that
goalied.
was
Yeah.
no, they did not get goalied. If anything, they got gifted. It was the opposite early in the game. But that was, I will say, a very sharp. I was actually in the process of typing out a tweet when JJ Peterka scored about how sharp a move that was by Mike Sullivan to pull Jari when he did, because I think the game would have gotten out of hand if he hadn't. And Blomqvist played great for basically the rest of the game, and the Sabres got him for a couple. But no, they didn't get goalied. That was a good in-game adjustment by Sullivan, and it just showed a team that I think will probably be in a similar spot to the Sabres all year, the Penguins. Like, I don't think the Penguins are necessarily a lock to make the playoffs, but you see the difference in the makeup of a veteran team that's been around the block, that goes down 2 goals early, doesn't panic, coughs up a lead in the third period, doesn't panic. And, Mike Sullivan's, goalie switch, I think, was part of that. But go ahead. I just wanted to squeeze in that point about.
No, it's all
Sullivan.
good. It's all good. That's a good point. No, they didn't get goalied, but yeah, I don't know what the answer is on Quinn, but I think we're at the point now where, going into tomorrow's game, if we agree that Cousins has, you got to remember too, I think he had some really bad looking numbers coming out of Prague, one of those games, especially, but I think it was because of the wingers were getting beat, not doing their job. Do you start to you can't move, do you use Peterka as a tool to get guys going? Do you move them down with Cousins to see if you can get them going? Do you flip flop Benson and Peterka? Benson only played 10 minutes tonight. He had he sat out a significant chunk of the game against Florida. I mean, do you go with the same lineup tomorrow? We can chew on that for a second. Because, I mean, Lindy can say, well, the team scored 5 goals. They battled back. They responded with 2 quick ones in 40 seconds in the third. That was really good to see. That was part of the fun element of the game. That's why I call it a fun hockey game. the ebbs and the flows. You saw a team get off to a hot start, then the other team, the veteran team, came back. They dug deep, they responded. You got the goalie change, a little bit of the chess match, the game within the game, and then Pittsburgh gets a 4-3 lead. Sabres score 2. Lindy could say, we got to just kind of keep moving in this direction with this team and just eliminate some of the mistakes, eliminate the turnovers on the boards, Cousins, things like that. I'd be curious to see what he does tomorrow. Cousins, by the way, let me just go to Cousins for a second, because I was sitting there watching in the third period, waiting for him to get like the retribution for the turnover, because I think you're right. He does beat himself up a little bit. And I'm wondering, like, what could he do to get going? And this is the crazy thought that I had. And I haven't really thought about it much because it could go really bad, because we saw it actually go bad last year. I think he needs to go out and like get in a scrap. Selectively pick an opponent that's not going to knock his nose off his face. I think he needs to get something going there, honestly, because the physical part of the game is very important to him. He had 0 hits tonight. And coming in, he was third amongst the forwards tonight coming into the game. It was Mallenstein, Greenway, and Cousins had 10. Sabres had 3 skaters coming into tonight's game with double-digit hits. He had 0 hits tonight. And I think there are opportunities where he probably could have used the body to get engaged physically to see if they can get his game going. I'm almost wondering if he needs to turn the knob up a little more obnoxiously and just go out and kind of pick one. I don't know. But some guys are kind of wired that way. And I'm starting to think about that with him. Is that what he needs to get the blood moving in his body to really just drag himself into the fight, drag himself in?
As long as it's not Garnet Hathaway, then
Yeah.
I think he'll be in good shape. That one, I think there is something to that the way he plays the game, and
it's caveman rhetoric, I know.
But he's better when he's physically engaged, and that was probably the biggest problem I had with his game at times last year, just not the same energy on a night-to-night basis. And that's a little bit of what people probably picked up on tonight, because the 0 hits, in addition to the lack of offense, is just like, it feels like there's an energy missing from him when he's not playing that way. So you might be right that a scrap would get him going, or just get him out of his head a little bit, because it's going to start to creep in. 5 games, no goals, no points. Like, it's going to start to get into his head a little bit. It would for anybody, I think.
Yeah.
And a guy that is putting a lot of pressure on himself, wearing a letter to be a guy that bounces back, it's definitely going to start to creep in. Like, if he doesn't get a point against Columbus, he's going to be gripping the stick.
And I don't think Lindy will shuffle the lines. I don't even think he needs to. But
I wouldn't mess with Peterka. Peterka's hot.
So I don't think he can. Yeah, especially with Benson kind of dinged and sitting down a little bit here and there and getting rest within the game. I don't think, because what's the move? Greenway's playing well.
The move, I think,
he's a Lindy player.
I think the move is to give Benson a game off and put Kulik back in.
I think you're right.
I know Benson is as tough as they come, and he's not gonna, tell anybody that he needs to sit out, but he's, that ankle is definitely not. I mean, Lindy said it the other day, he doesn't think he's 100%, and I don't think you get 100% with something like that by playing through it. I think it just continues to nag you a little bit, and he's practiced every day. He's played in every game since the one he missed, and he's getting some time off within games. But this just speaks to a potentially larger issue with the team and how it's constructed, is that an injury here or there, and it's hard to put the puzzle pieces back together. It's like Peterka was out, so they moved Benson up, but he's not 100%. So then you have a rookie playing on your second line. He's playing pretty well, but you end up with a situation where they were basically running 3 lines last week in the game that they won against Florida. In their 4th game of the season, you're running 3 lines, and this was supposed to be built from the 4th line up, but the injury to Obey Kubel, and they're going 11-7 in that game. it just feels like the forward depth, there's not enough proven scoring to lean on. And, Thompson's getting his goals. He's got 3 now. Tuck has 6 points, a point in 4 straight games, I think. He's playing pretty well. Peterka obviously had 2 goals tonight. So you're getting okay production out of that top line, especially when they're all together. But after that, it's dropping off in a big way. And they don't have a lot of answers to your point about how do you shuffle up the group. Are you going to break up the one thing that's working up top just to try to help Cousins get going?
The one thing I'll say about up top, and they are individually producing, but Peterka's been out. He comes back in tonight. I can't sit here and tell you that he scored 2 goals or had those breakaways because of plays and the chemistry that he has with Tuck and Thompson. That's one thing. The other thing is that they weren't like sensational as a kid line, but we know that Peterka, Cousins, and Quinn has worked in spots in the past when they were younger. It's just something to think about. I don't think he'll make that move. I think that the Kulik inserting him is a great move because Kulik had a pretty nice game. He's had a couple. He hasn't looked awful. I mean, he's responded well. You go back to Prague. Remember, he had the penalty, and I think he responded well in that game. Metrics were horrible on that line with Cousins and Quinn. Absolute dog shit that game. The metrics were, but he's gotten better. He's adjusting still, and I think that that's something to look at. I would look at that tomorrow if I'm Lindy. Actually, I kind of like your thought there.
I'd like to just give Benson a chance to heal up, force him to heal up, especially if you're going to be in a situation within the game where he's got to sit out for, chunks of time like he did tonight. It's like at that point, you'd rather have Kulik at 100, right? To be able to play him. And it's the only other option that I see that I don't, wouldn't thrill me, but it could potentially work is bumping Krebs up and, finding a way to get use of him. Maybe he could drag Cousins into the fight a little bit. He's played on the wing with Tage and Tuck. We haven't seen him with Cousins. Haven't seen him with Cousins in a long time, but I feel like back early in the 2022-23 season, they messed around with that a little bit.
Yeah, very nothing sustained.
But once the kid line stuck, that became, the line they went with.
I don't want to talk too much about the lines because here's the thing. It's like if you make the move, if you give Benson some rest, you put Kulik in, you keep the lines, that's fine because the power play is the problem. So it's like, look at that. Now you're not going to fix that overnight. You have a former goaltender running your power play. That's the irony of Seth ever running the power play. You might be the only former goaltender in the NHL running the power play. I'm not beating up Seth, by the way. It's just kind of irony, right? Like how much different is it? Because like that was the whole thing you heard about Matt Ellis. It's like, oh, he wasn't a goal scorer. He didn't, he never played on a power play. Well, then you replace him with a former goalie running your power play. You know what I mean? It's kind of funny. But
I don't know, by the way. I don't know, by the way. Matt Ellis is the eye in the sky. He's in the press box. I don't know who exactly is in the ear of the coaching staff on the challenges, but they did lose a challenge tonight on that offside. So Matt Ellis probably won't entirely escape criticism this year, even being the eye in the sky. He was the favorite target last year, and I don't know if there is a choice yet for the fan base on who they're going to blame for the power play now, but at some point it's got to be the guys on the ice, right?
Yeah, it's the guys on the ice.
Clearly. That's another reason to me to give Kulik a shot. He was close. Should have had a power play goal in I think that Florida game.
When he whiffed.
Yeah, he's a really legit threat on the power play at this level, and you need all the help you can get. I'd almost I wonder what you could set up with him and Tage on the ice at the same time. Maybe get some attention away from Tage if Kulik could give you a little something on the other side. I don't know.
I'd throw
be willing
Tuck
to try
back in
just about
front.
anything, right?
I'd throw Tuck back in front, and probably I wouldn't mind seeing Kulik get out there. I mean, on PP1s, just shake it up and see if they can use that shot, that big weapon. I mean, hell, they had Victor Olofsson out there scoring a ton of power play goals from the same spot that Kulik's going to be setting up shop at. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to sit here and just throw a bunch of shit at the wall, right? But I mean, that
Olofsson's
actually
off to
makes
a good
sense.
start to the year.
Yeah, he is. He is.
3 goals.
Yeah, and Casey has 3 goals too. I don't. It's crazy. UPL. So he lets in 6 tonight. We'll see Devin Levi tomorrow. What did you think of UPL's game tonight?
Didn't love it. The worst game he's played this year, I think. And I mean, it wasn't an awful game, but it's the worst one he's played in a while because he was just on such a heater to end the season last year. Didn't love the goal at the end of regulation, having that one squeezed through him. There was the 2-on-1 where Dahlin took away the pass and he had a clean look at the shot and got beat clean. I have not loved his start to the season generally. I don't think he's, elevated the way he did the second half of last season. I think he's been fine in most games. Didn't think he was fine tonight, but I think with a better goalie performance, they win that game. And there were a variety of other factors that played into it, but that's one. You want your goalie, chaotic back and forth game. You want your goalie to be able to steal for you. You want him to be able to make, a couple of saves. And that one at the end of the game in particular, having that one squeezed through him. There was also poor net front play there. I think some of that crept into the Sabres game, but I think it becomes an interesting conversation for this team because Devin Levi, I think, has outperformed him to this point in the season. And it seems the way Lindy Ruff is dividing things up that Devin Levi is going to get the chance to be the hot hand if it comes to that. Lindy Ruff basically said, at some point, one guy is going to run with it. So it's not a foregone conclusion that it's a Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen net with Devin Levi mixing in. I think it's a roughly 50-50 net until someone emerges. And the early signs, eye test for me, is that Levi looks like he's more ready to get on an early hot streak here. So, like you said, we'll see Levi on the second half of the back-to-back against Columbus tomorrow night. And I think if he wins, you go back to him on Saturday because coming into this road trip, my thought was got to get 4 points at least. And only getting 1 in this game means you got to win those 2 games, or get one of them to overtime. So I think you lose both, and you want to talk about crisis mode. You lose both, and you have the Stars coming into Buffalo next Tuesday, arguably the best team in the NHL right now. That feels a little closer to crisis mode than where they're at right now. But that's why I don't think they can afford to just go back and forth on the goalies and let it be 50-50 hunky-dory. I think it's got to be if Levi wins, I think he's got to get the net again. And I think you maybe give it to him until he loses. I don't know.
Yeah, and a lot of teams do that when they have 2 goalies that they want to get in. You play the guy until he loses and throw the other guy in there. This is a storyline that we'll be watching early in the season. I think you're right. Ideally with 2 young guys, two guys that you feel like you can rely upon, you would alternate. If the Sabres had 6 points right now instead of 3, you can say, okay, yeah, we can alternate despite what happens tomorrow. I think you're right, though. The storyline that I was referring to was, we've talked ad nauseum about how does Luukkonen react when he's got a guy nipping at him. And he's got a guy nipping at him right now early. and he's got to learn to deal with it if it's something that really does bother him. We don't know for sure. We know how he reacts when he's the guy and it's his team. We've talked about that on this show several times in the past. Doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't react well when he's got a guy nipping at him, but we're going to find out.
Don Granato's theory last year was that Levi's presence is why Luukkonen became what he became. But it would be really interesting to look and see his numbers simply when Levi was on the roster and when he was not on the roster. I think Don Granato is half right in that Levi being in the organization lit a bit of a fire under Luukkonen. I think there's no doubt about that. But it is an interesting trend to follow because you want it to be a healthy dynamic between those two guys. Luukkonen should not feel threatened in the sense that he is making a lot of money. He has the contract. They feel good about him. At worst, he's getting 40% of the games, right? Like, this is not a situation where Levi's going to be in the 80% of an 80-20 split. I don't think either of these guys get to that point. So it really shouldn't be a problem. But there's no doubt that Levi he just looks a lot better than he did 12 months ago. And
that's the goaltending conversation, by the way. The goaltending conversation is that Levi is showing that he belongs here, and what happened last year is not going to happen again. It's not really Luukkonen's playing poorly. That's not what we're saying.
He's not playing the way he was at the end of the season, but he was playing out of his mind in the second half of last season. So some regression was expected. And frankly, I don't think it's an alarming amount, through what does he have 3 starts now in 5 games? I don't think it's been any sort of alarming, play from him. Didn't love the game against the Penguins. It was simple as that. But I think to your point, the bigger piece of this is that Levi looks like he's ready to stick this time. And he's still got to show more than just 2 games, but it's not even numbers. I couldn't even really tell you goals saved above expected or, any of that for him at this point. I can just tell you looking at him and being around him a little bit, he just feels a little bit more calm, a little bit more composed. He's a year more mature, you can really tell. And he's still got the same oddball personality and, he's a quirky dude, but he just feels a lot more chill in the net and just seems like the speed of the game he's caught up to it for sure. And that speed of the game, reading the game, like those are the biggest things he had to figure out, because once he did, everything else was going to kick in, right? He's got the athleticism, the skating, the battle. Like in a scrambly game like tonight, I think you'd rather have a Levi, in net for you. So very good signs from him early. I think he's been maybe the biggest bright spot, one of the biggest bright spots on the team early
Greenway.
on. Greenway's been great. Peterka
Levi.
getting a couple tonight. Owen Power was
Owen
really
Power
good early.
knocked a guy down tonight. He didn't get credited with a hit. About 3:45 left in regulation. Pushed a guy to the ice. And I noticed it because I was like, oh, he's going to get called for a penalty. They didn't call him. He did knock a guy down tonight. Levi, by the way, I think you're right, though. For me, it is eye test also. He's always been very sharp, crisp, good puck tracker. He looks confident in there. His win did come against a Florida team missing 2 of the best players in the world. And he's going to draw a pretty favorable matchup tomorrow. Let's see what he does against a big boy opponent. But, the NHL, listen, I mean, it's all, they're all good players. I'm not saying
he was great against New Jersey in Prague.
Yeah.
He was great.
And that's a good team. Yeah.
He was the only reason that game was close. And, I think one of the goals he let up in that game, like, wasn't great, but it was towards the end. And it was like he had already bailed them out so many other times. Yeah, he's just looked real steady back there. So yeah, this is an opportunity for him because, like you said, he looks a lot different than last year. He looks ready, but part of being a young goalie and the challenge of sticking and cementing yourself as part of a tandem is hitting that repeat button over and over and playing a lot and being able to do it a couple times a week, for your team. And this is one of those spots where I wouldn't say they're desperate only 5 games into the season, but it's urgent, right? It's not crisis mode, but things are urgent. You need
Yeah.
to win against Columbus. And it's second half of back-to-back. You just played an overtime game. It's not great, but it's a short trip. And, I would argue Columbus, even with 2 days rest, the emotional aspect of Tuesday night for them, their home opener, first game, in that building since
Mhm.
Johnny Gaudreau passed, like they're probably more spent than the Sabres are at this point, having just dealt with everything that went into that game. So I don't think the back-to-back's an excuse. I think it's, they got to go into Columbus and win, and then playing Chicago on Saturday. It's 2 winnable games, and might be a chance to get Levi's. If he wins both those games, he's going to be feeling pretty good, pretty confident, and that'll get this team back in a decent place if, coming back to host the Stars next week.
So I didn't do this on the way in. We're 41, almost 42 minutes in. Those that are watching here live, if you could please hit that like button and hit that notification bell so you know when Matthew and I go live. I knew something was up. I'm rusty, man, because it's been 2 weeks. I had some business travel last week, was unable to do the show. We just kind of jumped right in tonight. But yeah, if you could hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. We appreciate it. We are planning on going back again and doing this tomorrow, just so you know. So a little double header, a little back-to-backer here for the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. I do hope you're right, Matthew, on the Kulik thing, going back to the forwards. Benson probably could use a rest. I'd love to see Kulik in there. I'd love to see Kulik on the power play and get the first power play goal for the Sabres this season. I'd like to see him get going and apply some good pressure to those wing spots there. And maybe his presence, kind of like you talked about VPL, Levi being around, maybe waking him up, maybe Kulik getting going, get some other guys to finish, get some other guys to wake up.
I mean, if you really want to get spicy, you could put Kulik in for Quinn, but if you really wanted to send a message, and that's what becomes interesting, I think, about this version of the Sabres, is that there was a lot of talk about the big A word, all summer.
You could say it
And,
one more time. You could say it.
The accountability, right? And the
Mhm.
non-negotiables. And this was the problem that they had last year. It was like, who are you benching these guys for, right? And how often can you press that button, right? If you're gonna bench guys left and right, and doesn't it start to ring a little hollow at some point? Because a lot of people were like, why did Cousins play after that turnover? And it's like, well, I don't know. It becomes an interesting thing to follow and track, because there have been some bench shortenings. There haven't been too many instances really of ice time being totally taken away, but at some point, I think Lindy's been pretty steady so far. He's been pretty level-headed. He's been pretty optimistic about the group. He's not panicking by any stretch. But you wonder when the message will come for somebody, right? To maybe put a little jolt into the team. I thought maybe he would do it with Samuelson after the Kings game, right? He took that penalty late in the game.
Yep.
And he didn't scratch him, but he did dress Gilbert the next game and gave him 5 minutes, and I think a little bit of a message sent there,
Yeah.
right? But
Send a signal. Yep.
yeah, a little bit like, hey, I got another guy here. And maybe that, like you said, Kulik looks more ready than I thought he would in these first few games. That first game in Prague, I kind of throw out the window because he's dealing with.
Nervous and yeah.
He had one game last year, but that really felt like his debut, right? Like it felt, he earned a spot in camp, gets it in his home country, a lot of family and friends there. Understandable that he would be, feeling pretty nervous and just outside of himself. Settled in really nice when they got back and when he got a few more games. So the way he's playing away from the puck is what makes me say, I think he's ready. I think he belongs in Buffalo. And if he can hold his own away from the puck, I think you want to get him in there as often as possible so that the offense, so he can find it. Because I think he will find it. That's what he does. It's what he's done at every level so far. I think he has the potential to be a really, really good NHL goal scorer. Let him find it. Let him, work through what he's working through. He could have had a couple of goals against Florida. So he's right there. He's knocking on the door. And that would apply some significant pressure to a few guys in the lineup.
Yeah, if you think that he can be an asset that you can use, then you got to get him in. Don't break his rhythm. He was making progress by getting, some looks, I guess. But like even that first game in Prague, that was like his first game, and he had this big stretch. Got in a preseason game back in Buffalo, didn't play. It was he had like what, a week and a half, or almost 2 weeks where he didn't play, and then he was thrown in after Paterka got clobbered there by Brendan Dillon. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I'm looking at. You said accountability, by the way. I started looking at the chat. And of course, Cummings says, yeah, accountability, drink. If that's what it takes to get you to drink, do it. I thought maybe this game would have, or at least the result for those in the chat. It is going to be a shorter one tonight. This is not going to be an hour and a half show tonight. I could guarantee you that. I'm actually pretty good. We should probably hit the chat. We just went pretty much 50 minutes straight. I did not tweet the link tonight, by the way, and it did not go to Twitter for some reason. So I probably messed that up. We'll get that going, though, in the future.
Still got a decent crowd in here, so
no,
even
I like
without
it.
the promo.
I like it. Yeah. Do you have anything that you want to throw up from the chat? No.
I like this from Dan. He said, "Where's Cousins? Where's Quinn? Where's all my money go?" Yeah, I mean I'm sure how the Sabres are feeling when you look at that line as kind of a black hole production wise. That's your second line. Like they need to get going.
We were talking about lines and talk about getting Cousins going. Michael Ubinet over in Ovik or in Skoldsvik, Sweden says, I know the third line is cooking, but I want to swap places on Cousins and McLeod, get Cousins some better support. I understand the argument, or at least the thought. I do. I'm expecting them to stay, like I said, I think relatively intact tomorrow, but it is something that you have to start thinking about. If the power play keeps firing blanks, then you got to see if you can get some things going at 5-on-5, and that might be something that they'll look at.
McLeod's playing well. He got the goal tonight. He's not a great finisher, but he obviously opens up a ton of ice with the way he skates, and that line in general is really, really looking good. McLeod might be an interesting option. I mean, he's been a fixture on the penalty kill, but he might be an interesting option on the power play because he can win faceoffs. And obviously, time of possession on the power play is one of their problems right now. They are coming into this game. They had according to NHL Edge stats, I believe 47% offensive zone time and on the power play. And last year, the league average was 59%. I think even the Sabres were at, 57 or something. They were below average, but they were 47% of the time on the power play spent in your own zone is actually closer to the league average of offensive zone time at even strength than it is to the league average on the power play. So they need to get something figured out in terms of entering the zone is a problem on the power play, but also, winning draws, maintaining possession when you do have the offensive zone draws to just get set up. They've hardly been set up.
The very short power play that they had tonight, they won the offensive zone draw. Tage gets the puck high in the zone, throws it across the blue line, and I think there was no one home, and it was quickly, they were back in the neutral zone, just gathering themselves and trying to get back to work. Fell apart that fast. They won the faceoff, got possession, and then I was like, oh, I was excited. I was like, hey, they won the faceoff. We're going to see them actually get set up. They don't have to skate through the neutral zone and bust in. But yeah, that was something. Frank Farkle was hitting the chat pretty good here. He had a couple. He was late tonight because he threw up all over himself. Sorry to hear about that, Frank Farkle. But he did also have a comment about the former goaltender coaching the PP. Again, I'm not picking on Seth at all. It's just, like I said, it's just kind of the irony of the situation. This is why, see, I do expect this, and I'm not there yet, but it's the Mike Girage says this team is so flawed, it should be impossible to be this bad this long. Listen, that was part of my thought process when you asked me on the eve of the season if what I thought was going to happen with the Sabres this year, I'm like, I think they'll make the playoffs, because you can't possibly go, multiple presidential terms without making the playoffs. And well, they already have, but I mean, far beyond that. So Mike, there's a lot of fans that feel like you right now. I mean, there was a lot of fans that felt like that coming back from when the team was coming back from Prague. And I'm not going to sit here and piss on anybody's head and tell them that it's raining. I think there's some concerns with this team when they can't score with the man advantage. And that's like the biggest thing that I worry about with this team.
Well,
What
they
else you
can't
got?
score. They can't score with the man advantage, but they also don't have. If they were a different team, then 1-3-1 isn't all that big of a deal. But it's the lack of proven goal scoring. You got 1 year, 2 years of Tage being an elite goal scorer. You got 1 year really from Tuck, 1 year from Cousins, 1 good year from Peterka, and a promising start tonight. But where are the rest of the goals coming from? And when those guys aren't going, where do you turn? I think that, again, we're not really breaking a lot of new ground here, right? This was topic number 1 coming into the offseason. Go find a top 6 forward. You got rid of Skinner, Olofsson, these guys who have scored a fair amount of goals in the league. Middlestat, you got rid of, leading scorer when you traded him. All in isolation, fine moves, right? Like, we were okay with the premise of the Skinner buyout. But then you don't really backfill the goals. There's a lot of goals. Like, he scores a lot. Olofsson, it was obviously time to go, but you do start to wonder if he can put together another 20-plus goal season. You do start to wonder why they couldn't get that out of him last year. And Middlestat, he's got, 3 goals in 3 games? Colorado's playing right now. I don't know if he scored again tonight, but those moves are all fine in a vacuum. But in the bigger roster building puzzle, you'd need to be able to score. And were they counting on too much internal improvement or internal bounce back? Time
It's
will
clear they
tell.
were. I mean,
But
listen,
right
he's already
now,
talking about not spending to the cap with the guys that he has here that he hasn't signed yet. I think it's
right,
clear that they
a big part of that was, all the RFAs they had. Well, you can't go out and get, Jake DeBrusk because you need to save money for, you know, next year and the year after and the year after that. But I don't know. Jake DeBrusk scores
I mean,
now, right now,
I
right? Like it's win now. So I think that will become, a bigger and bigger conversation the longer the scoring problem persists and the longer guys like Jack Quinn. I mean, I guess that's the upshot, right? If Jack Quinn continues to play like this, you'll save some money
yeah.
because he's not going to get the $7 million that was the preseason projection if you were, banking on the improvement in goals. Paterka looks like he's going to become a wealthy young fella here at some point. Maybe they should get on that sooner rather than later. But Quinn's one that you got to kind of wait and see because between the injuries and now this, a little bit of a sluggish start, the big question I posed when I wrote that story at the beginning of the season, before the season started, about, projecting those contracts, how much money should they save, the whole thing. The big question at the end was like, do you really lock up a core that hasn't won anything? Like, you got to wait and see how this is all fitting together. And it's still early. It's 5 games. Not going to sit here and say they need to have Quinn on the trading block or anything like that. But it's just a continuation of the offseason conversation, right? Because these are problems that I think were somewhat predictable. And 5 games is a small sample size, but it's the only sample size we got.
We're going to be here all season long talking about it. Grumpy Scott says they could really use a PP goal from that 7 million in cap space. I can argue with that. Michael Pakla says, yes, flip-flop them, Kris. This was going back to 10:37, so well over a half hour ago. It's exactly what I was typing as you said that. I think he's talking about Benson and Peterka. Now, in full disclosure, Matthew, in the first game of the season when you were in Prague, I think we were midway through that game and I texted you. And this was in game 1. And I was thinking about nothing against Peterka. It was more about getting Benson up because of the right plays that he makes. Like we talked about that, you and I, in text in the first game of the season about putting flip-flopping Benson and Peterka. And Spike, if you're still here, Pakla, if I'm talking about the wrong flipping and flopping, let us know in the chat. Yeah, I don't know if you can do that right now with Benson, ankle situation, whatever it is. Yeah, I don't know. It's just real tricky right now. Put Kulik in tomorrow. Said it 3 times. Matt, you said it once. You were first to say it. And see what happens there.
This is another thing we haven't really hit on, but KevCon80 says Darlene is by far the least explainable storyline of the season. 1 point in 5 games. Not quite the guy that he's not playing like an $11 million player. That's for sure. I don't know if is
he playing
fighting,
hurt?
He might still be fighting whatever he was dealing with in the preseason. He did miss a decent amount of practice time with that. So I think that is what you wonder about first. He did get into the he looked pretty healthy when he was throwing haymakers at Krebs in practice the other day.
Highlight of the season so far for Darlene.
He looked that would have, let's see it in a game, I guess, right? Like some of that fire that hit, I think that's a pretty big concern too. This is a guy that's supposed to carry your team as a captain, as an $11 million defenseman, as a potential Norris Trophy candidate at some point in his career. It's not there right now. So that's where a lot of offense can come from too. When you're built from the blue line out, you have 2 number 1 overall picks on the blue line. I think wanting a little bit more offense out of those guys is absolutely a reasonable reasonable complaint at this point in the season, especially from Dahlin, because Power, I think, has been pretty good. I just feel like Dahlin has not been his usual self, to put it mildly.
Yeah, and we'll leave some meat on the bone for tomorrow. I think I want to see if they make any adjustments. Do you take Zucker off that power play? Do you put Tuck back in front? Things like that. I think little adjustments, little tweaks. Kind of curious to see if Lindy does anything. But I'm good here at an hour on the nose. Did you get all your starred chats in?
I did.
All right. Let's leave some meat on the bone for tomorrow. I'm going to have coffee before tomorrow's show because I am definitely low energy Baker tonight. I was talking a lot today too, if you can't tell. So
it always happens to my voice this time of night too.
I'm going to cancel all calls tomorrow and just save myself for the Baker Fairburn hockey show. Disappointing result for Sabres fans. Hopefully there's a slightly different vibe in the chat tomorrow for your sake. Hopefully Sabres get a W. We'll be here to talk about it following the game. On your way out, if you could please, again, like this video, subscribe to the channel. You can find the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, leave a 5-star review for us. And you can dump all over the Sabres in the comments, but leave a 5-star review for Matthew and I. We would greatly appreciate that. For Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic, and I'll do a better job, Matthew, teeing you up as The Athletic Sabres writer. We'll talk about the deal that The Athletic has tomorrow on the way in. For the production crew out having margaritas in my driveway, I'm Kris Baker. Thanks, everyone, for hopping in. We'll see you again tomorrow night here on YouTube and maybe Twitter. Have a good night.